Thank you, Isabel. I want to thank everyone for kind of braving the storm. I tend to project loudly, but if you can't hear me, just let me know, okay? So we're going to kind of cover a lot today. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try to introduce you guys to the Mocama, give a really brief history of the Mocama, kind of talk about what we know. We feel kind of confident that we know either from archaeology and or the historic documents, really trying to really scrutinize the documents. Then I'll try to introduce the Guale and the Yamasee, who also appear on this island, okay? And then I'm going to end it with the DeBry engravings. These are probably engravings that you're very familiar with. I'm going to argue that they misinform us greatly about the Timucua Indians, and we need to be incredibly cautious on how we kind of view them, all right? So let's go ahead and get started here. This is a timeline of the human history. The human history right here of northeastern Florida. It goes back 13,000 years. So from 13,000 years to today, 97% of that history is an indigenous history. So what we're actually going to talk about today is this little period right here, okay? And when most people think about the indigenous people of this area, they think about this because this is what's read in the documents, okay? We need to remember that a lot of that is kind of being framed through European lenses. They're kind of projecting their kind of worldviews on the way they're interpreting the indigenous people. But this history here is incredible. It's incredibly dynamic, it's far-reaching, it's a great story. But we're going to deal with just a little part here, okay? Really, the earliest time period we have represented here are these Clovis projectile points that have actually been found. Believe it or not, where they've been found is on the beach that they've washed out. If we think about it, when Native Americans first moved into Florida 14,000 years ago, right now, if you go out there and you put your little toes in the Atlantic Ocean, and then you snap your fingers, that water that's at your toes, and you move back 14,000 years, that water is now 70 miles from you. So right now, we're in the interior hinterlands. That's why we're not finding a lot dating to that period. Where it is out beneath ocean waters and sometimes washing in. All right. So this is looking kind of here at the landscape. This is the indigenous landscape of about the 1500s, right when the French and the Spanish are kind of arriving here. We're going to have the Timucua speakers kind of covering that North Florida, Southeast Georgia. To the west, we're going to have the Appalachee. That's going to be the modern day kind of a Tallahassee area. Then we move into southern Georgia. We're going to have the Guale, and then we're going to look at a group here that's in the interior part in the Yamasee. And we're going to look at this motion picture, this kind of this little dynamic that's going to happen after European arrival, in which these groups are going to either contract and kind of move across the landscape. All right? This is ground zero. Ground zero for early European, both French and Spanish colonization, is along the Atlantic coast, from St. Augustine to kind of the Georgia, South Carolina border. That's it. That is a big impact. So what it means is these coastal groups, the Timucua speakers, the Mocama, the Guale, are going to bear the brunt of that initial contact and entanglement with them. And I'm going to argue here, and I think a lot of people would agree, that in terms of entanglement with Europeans, no group endured that more consistently than the Timucua of northern Florida and southeastern Georgia. All right? So Timucua is a language. That's really what Timucua is. So Timucua is spoken across this part right here, northern peninsula Florida, southeastern Georgia, probably about 19,000 square miles. So it's going to cover groups that are living kind of in different environments, from the coastal hammocks and estuaries to the rivers, the flatwoods, the upland kind of forests, the river and interriverine areas. All right? What we have here is a dialect called Mocama. There are 11 dialects that we know of the Timucua language. And the language that's spoken here is Mocama. Mocama is an indigenous word, and it means the sea. Okay? I know Mocama Brewery likes to get a little purple prose. It's where, the big water where the sun is born. Sounds great. Mocha means sea, S-E-A, and ka at the end is article the, so it's the sea. Okay? So it is the coastal dialect. But it's not the only dialect along the coast. Along the coast was the Agua Salada of Saloy, St. Augustine area. All right? Potano, if we are in Gainesville, the dialect is Potano. So when we think about this, European explorers early on kind of met different Timucua speakers. Hernando de Soto, when in his Atrada went through the kind of the central part, the horse country kind of the middle part of the peninsula, they encountered Timucua speakers. Okay, the Patano, when Jean Ribaud waited ashore to Fort George Island, he met with Timucua speakers. Okay, the Mocama, when Pedro Menendez dropped anchor, he met with Timucua speakers, the Agua Salada of Saloy in that area. So they're over this broad area. Okay, what is the name for the indigenous group? What do you tend to call them? Timucua, right? Or Timucua. We don't know the pronunciation, so I'm not going to up here and tell you this is how you pronounce it, because we don't know. But I say Timucua, right? It appears that this is a corruption of this word right here, Thimagona. And you hear some erroneous stuff. Well, Thimagona is basically their word for enemy. And that's not true. Thimagona seems to be the name or a corruption of a name of an individual, probably a leader, a holado, chief. Okay, and so the French were trying to convey to the Spanish to come help us, against our rival, Thimagona, and they thought they were saying that. So this is corrupted into Timucua, and then it's kind of superimposed on them. Okay, so we don't know their self-identifying name. Any name that we give them, whether it's Timucua, whether it's Mocama, whether it's Patano, those are names we're still superimposing on them, but at least those are indigenous names. So really, what we have here are the Mocama, who are Timucua speakers. So we can still call them Timucua. We just sometimes say Mocama to be more specific. That 40-mile stretch from just south of the mouth of the St. Johns River into probably the Satilla River in southeastern Georgia, those are the Mocama dialect, okay? And that's our area, all right? And so this becomes kind of Timucua. It's interesting, in the Spanish documents in the 1600s, they refer to this area as the Mocama province. And when they talk about Timucua, they tend to refer to that interior part, west of the St. Johns River, that area into southeastern Georgia. That's where the Timucua were to them, okay? But they're all broadly Timucua speakers. And the reason we know some of this is that every time the Spanish would go into the area or have these larger kind of visitations or meeting with the indigenous people, they always had a translator. And they would say the translator is Juan Anellis, and he's a speaker of the Timucua language, or the Guale, or the Muskhogean-speaking language, whatever it might be. So that kind of helps us out. All right? So again, here's our map here, all right? Just looking at some of the groups in Florida, we have the Ais just to the south, we have the Tocobaga here. Again, here's kind of the different dialects that we see. The freshwater dialect, the saltwater dialect. Unfortunately, those, we don't know the indigenous names for them. And the reason we know this is there's a priest who is basically on Fort George Island in the 1600s, early 1600s, and he writes this confessionario and a catechism. Basically, he's writing this for future friars who come to this area and giving them kind of background on the local indigenous people. And he writes this grammar and dictionary. And everyone thinks he's this great linguist. And now what he does, a lot of things, he writes these catechisms and these dictionaries in Spanish, and then he has them also in Timucua. Well, we've analyzed and translated the Spanish version, but the Timucua version has only recently been. Aaron Broadwell at University of Florida is doing this great work with the Timucua language. We have like 2,000 pages of Timucua. People don't know about it. And he's really deciphering that. And what's great is he sees the Spanish, and then he looks at the Timucua, and he realizes it's not exactly the same. This is being written by Timucua, because what the priest is telling him, he's filtering through their own cultural system, and it comes out really kind of different. And we're learning all this great stuff about them. And Aaron has a book that's coming out new on that. All right, so there we are with our Mocama. All right, what do we know about them in terms of the history, in terms of their history and encounter with Europeans? It begins with a very short and brief encounter in 1562 with Jean Ribaud. Everybody heard of Jean Ribaud? I think in Jacksonville we call him Ribault, Ribault High School. How long is Jean Ribaud here in northeastern Florida when he comes in 1562? 1 day, maybe 2 days. Okay? He comes here, he reconnoiters, he moves on, and establishes a small little fort called Charles Fort on Parris Island, South Carolina. All right? So it's a really brief encounter. And I really strongly doubt this is the first encounter with the Timucua. I think they are probably being encountered earlier by Spanish on these illicit trade raids that are going along the Florida coast that's based out of the Caribbean. All right, but that's our first documented one. Then we see them returning with Laudonnière. Laudonnière, second in command to Ribaud, So they come back in 1564 and they establish Fort Caroline, the La Caroline colony. There you go. That's the one that lasts 15 months. Okay? A lot of people don't realize this, but the Spanish take it over. And after a couple days on accident, they burn it down. They rebuild it in the exact same spot, and it goes on for 3 years as a Spanish fort, Fort San Mateo. Okay, so really, the archaeological footprint for it, if we ever find it, it's probably going to be stronger for a Spanish fort than the French fort. All right, the Spanish kind of take over from the French, and what we see is it's what amounts to, I think, a little war goes on between the Spanish and the Mocama between roughly 1565, 66 into the early 1580s. They are constantly battling with one another, burning fields, attacking one another, really high tensions between them. Something happens in the 1580s and it seems to subdue it a little bit, and that's where we see missions kind of move into the area. All right? So that's where we have them begin missionization, primarily trying to convert the indigenous people to Catholicism. All right? We have a couple of failed attempts early on by the Jesuits, then another small one by the Franciscans, but it really doesn't take hold until 1587. Okay, so they're based out of St. Augustine in 1587, and at this time, 1587, there are probably 100 people living in St. Augustine. There's going to be one priest who's going to be at San Juan del Puerto, Alamacani, and Fort George Island, one priest on Cumberland Island at the Catacaru, San Pedro. So that's it, okay, in the Mocama area. So this is still a big indigenous world at this point in time, all right? So they're going to start to convert them to Catholicism, all right? I think when you think of the missions, you probably think of other areas, right? California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and the Alamo. So we see in those areas in California, it's much later and shorter. The mission attempt here is actually much stronger and lasts longer than it did in California. One of the big reasons California gets more of the publicity for missions is they have standing structures that are still there, the ruins of them. Here, everything was made out of basically wood, timber, and palmetto. They may have used some plastering daub, but that falls off, gets buried. So there's no standing structures to see the missions and the like. All right? So the mission system that they established is they are trying to bring the indigenous people into, they're trying to subdue them through conversion. Right? So really where they're going to start, based out of St. Augustine, they first start along the coast. And we see the Guale and Mocama areas are the first ones to be missionized. So this starts in 1587. Okay? Then in 1607, they start to move inland. And they move into the interior Gainesville area and a little bit north of that, where the interior Timucua are. Okay? And then after that, they move into the Tallahassee area, and they start doing the Appalachian. That's in 1633. Okay? They move into Appalachia because these are the major farmers. They need food. The mission system is built on the back of the indigenous people. They are supplying the food and the labor that's keeping this colony going. Without them, it would have failed miserably. Okay? So they're trying to bring them in, conversion, but also they're trying to get them there for the food and the labor that they can supply. All right? So let's come back to our area. Let's come back to northeastern Florida. In 1587, they established two missions. Alamacani, San Juan del Puerto, Fort George Island, Catacaru, Cumberland Island, San Pedro de Mocama. Okay? Then, in about 1607, we're not sure of the exact thing, but it's after 1605, it's before 1609. So somewhere in that area, we see two more develop. And one's going to be Santa Maria, which is here at Harrison Homestead on Amelia Island. And then the second one is Guadalquivir, which is on St. Simon's Island. Okay, so by 1610, there's four of them. And the way that this usually works is that there's one priest living in a village, and then he has outlying villages that he kind of proselytizes to, right? So there's going to be main villages, and then main towns, and then smaller ones kind of around it, okay? What we see happening is there's those outlying ones, those people are going to start either people are dying off, or people are just leaving this area, and they're going to start contracting and moving into the missions themselves. So what happens here, it goes that Guadalquivir goes down and moves to Black Hammock Island, just across from Fort George Island. This one here, San Pedro, moves to here. Then this one here moves to here. And eventually they all move to Fort George Island by 1696. So you see this movement south and this contraction, and numbers are decreasing over time. One of the things that's really pushing them south is that England, British, have established Charlestown, or the Carolina colony, and they are raiding missions for Indians. Okay, so we think a lot of times a lot of the Africans who are being stolen and taken as slaves, but that's also happening to southeastern Indians, where they're basically taking them, bringing them back to Charleston, and then they're shipping them to the Caribbean. Okay, and so the Spanish says, to protect you, kind of move down closer to us. But they maintain their kind of autonomy and their political strength, the Mocama. All right, the mission system real quick. It's not like they build a church, build the church and they will come. It's not that. The way it is, the Spanish decides, okay, the best way for us to kind of get into their system is basically be invited. But we want to be invited by one of their leaders. Okay? So we want to look at all the way to Timucua. That big area of Timucua, they're not united politically. All right? There are lots of little kind of polities, little kind of political organizations. And usually it's one main village, then a satellite of anywhere from 5 to 10 that are kind of tied to that village. So what the Spanish want to do is get invited into that main village, and the priest will live there. Okay, so the priest moves into an indigenous village. They build him a church, and they build a convento for him to live in. There's a little kitchen area, okay, and that's it. The rest of it is still indigenous. It's still their houses. It's still their council house where they have their political meetings. They still control their politics, okay? The outlying areas, he calls them, priests call them visitas, because they go and visit them periodically. Okay, so they live in one of the main towns, and then they go and visit those satellite towns. And those satellite towns may have had a little chapel or something like that, but when he does go, there's a place for him to say mass. Other times they are coming to the island where the church is. All right, so that's kind of the political structure that's there. All right, if we go back to 1602 again, when they first arrived, there was a priest who was on, there's actually two priests, one on Fort George Island and one on Cumberland Island. Believe it or not, that village and that priest actually controls the island here. Okay, so really the one that's situated here in southeast Georgia controls Amelia Island, and the one at the Fort George Island controls Big Talbot Island and that mouth of the river, and just on the south side of the mountain. So this area falls under the jurisdiction of the chief Catacaru and the broader mission of San Pedro. But the priest there talks about, from San Pedro, anybody ever been to Cumberland Island? Okay, what is it, Dungeness Wharf, that large, is it Rockefeller, one of those rich guys' houses? That's where it is. It's right underneath there. Okay, that's where the mission was. So from there, he's writing about things, what things are going on and so forth, and he talks about having a series of visitas, a series of community visits. Okay, and he's also said these little hamlets that are tied to it. And he lists these 4. He also lists 2 more. Santo Domingo, which is Napaica, which is Old Town. And the other one he mentions is Santa Maria de Sena, which is going to be Harrison, Homestead, Harrison Creek area. All right, so he does mention 2 of them on the island. Doesn't say a whole lot about them, but we know that there are Mocama living there. Santa Maria, this is 1602. Santa Maria gets up to a mission. So a priest moves in there, and it becomes a mission in 1607, so just 5 years later. All right? All right. Last thing here, this is a great map. Great map. One of the last maps we have of this early period. It's probably 1705. This is the mouth of the St. Johns River, so if you're familiar with it, that's the mouth of the river. Right here would be Mayport. This right here is, if you're familiar with Jacksonville, Queens Harbor Yacht and Country Club. That is the last Mocama community that we know of in northeastern Florida. And then to the north, what you're going to have here is an island, and it says Island of San Juan. We know for 100%, because it's over and over again, the island of San Juan is Fort George Island. Next is the Isle of Sarabay, and we know really confident now that the Isle of Sarabay is Big Talbot Island. The one to the top, where they have a little sentry outpost right there, what do you think it says? What's that? It says Santa Maria. It says Isle of Santa Maria, and Isle of Santa Maria we know 100% is Amelia Island. All right. What is interesting, so this is a 1705 map. We have a pilot who was basically charting the coastline in 1609. So 100 years earlier, he's charting the coastline from St. Augustine up to the Chesapeake Bay. And when he comes to this area, all these names that he's using for the rivers and the islands are the exact same ones we see on this map. Okay, so there's a long history of these names kind of being used. All right. So everyone okay? Good. Yeah. All right. So we're going to talk about what do we know about the Mocama. Okay. Kind of looking at the documents, looking at archaeology. What do we know? A couple of things is we know that they have hereditary leaders at the town level. They're going to have different communities. They actually have towns, probably slightly smaller villages, and then maybe even small like hamlet areas, okay? What constitutes a town for us has a council house. It's a large public building. And we think we've found the only one on Big Talbot Island over the last few years associated with Sarah Bay. All right? So the leader is called Holata, okay? And if they're, like, it's translated roughly, we'd say chief. Chiefs is Holatakare. So sometimes to kind of humanize them, we're starting to introduce indigenous words, Timucuan words, Mocama words there. So they had a Holata. The Holata had a considerable power, but it was tempered a little bit by a broader council. Council probably elders, both men and probably matriclans, the clan mother, who carried a lot of clout. We see they have 7 ranked matrilineal clans. So what a matrilineal clan is your relationships, your genealogy is only through your mother's line. It includes males and females, but only through your mother's line. So it's your mother, okay, her mother's mother, our brothers and stuff like that. So that's how it's reckoned here. What that means is women carry incredible power in Mocama society, okay? And I think that gets lost in European times because the men want to deal with who? Men want to deal with men. Okay, so that gets sometimes, I think, lost the strength that older women that are clan leaders have. Okay, we do among the Mocama have female holatas. Sometimes these are not females who are just holding the position until a young child becomes old enough to take over. They're actually in line in succession for that position. So we have these clans. I think it's deer, bear, panther, quail, buzzard. I think buzzard is probably English taking it, which means hawks, and may actually be hawk, fish and herb. Deer clan seems to be the highest ranked, so usually holatas derive from a deer clan. So there is going to be a degree of like institutionalized inequality within these groups. All right, they lived in towns and villages, like I mentioned. Council houses kind of set them apart. All right, the 2 principal ones I've already mentioned. The main Mocama leaders, when the French and Spanish first arrived, probably in the 1560s, are going to be Takatakaru, who was on Cumberland Island, and Satariwa, who is probably in the general vicinity of the Mayport Naval Station. So we have 2 kind of controlling like the southern and the northern Mocama areas. They are great allies, okay? So they are not in any way antagonistic towards one another. They have a mixed economy, okay? Remember that timeline I showed you that goes back 13,000 years? Probably from 13,000 years until maybe 5,000, maybe 6,000 years ago. That's transitory. People are just moving in this area, or if they're living more permanently, they're out under the waters today. But where we start to see them in our area is about 6,000 years ago. That's when the coastline stabilizes and we see estuaries, and from that point on, they are people of the marsh. They are living off marsh resources. The tidal creeks, the river, the marsh. Sure, we'll see in archaeological sites, we see some deer, we'll see opossum and raccoons, okay? But it's overwhelmingly deer, turtle, and then shellfish, all right? So they tend to be manifested, we call these shell middens. Midden just means garbage. So these are piles of garbage in which the most visible constituent, the most visible thing in it is shell. Lots of time when we go through these, there's pottery, other kinds of garbage in it. What is great for us as archaeologists, these shells are full of calcium. So as they're throwing garbage away, they're throwing what they have left over, fish, the bones, any animals they butcher, they go in there as well. Over time, when it rains, the calcium leaches out of the shells and the bones absorb them. So we get bone preserving. So we can have middens here that are 4,000 years old or 2,000 years old, and we'll get all these little fish bone preserving. Had all those bones been thrown over here and no shell, they would have decomposed years and years and years ago. So it helps us really get at what they're eating. And they are eating everything out of the marsh, all right? And so we excavate these, like I said, we can do analysis on looking at the fish. I can help identify a bone, but I could not really tell what a fish is if you pulled it out of the water. But we get all kinds of things you would expect, all right? We're also getting deer and so forth. I think with raccoons and opossums, particularly those nocturnal ones, since they have these trash piles, I guarantee you they're setting traps up there because at night they're going to be attracted to those areas and they're catching those little critters. But I think this is kind of an accurate kind of portrayal of what we see, okay? Then what happens, and they're hunting, of course. You know, can you spot Waldo here? There he is. I mean, he has a little deer disguise on. But we get corn. All right. So in the interior, so if we're talking about Georgia, Alabama, along the Mississippi River, they're farming corn probably in large amounts, probably at least by 1,000, okay, 1,000 years ago, maybe even a little bit earlier. All right. We don't see it here until 400 years later. It's much later here, and it's less in its intensity. Okay, I think they're more gardening kind of. That really ramps up, and the Spanish start wanting food from them. We see them growing more corn. But our areas really aren't as conducive to corn farming. We'll get it. Usually it's carbonized. So a lot of times they do these little smudge pits that when you burn corn cobs, there's just a lot of little smoke there. That's good for a couple things, tanning. And we also know that they used it interior to create kind of a mosquito repellent, having all that kind of smoke in there. So it's much later here. Some people ask, why is it so late here? My thing is, why even do it here when you have all that seafood available to you, all that rich estuary? There's a lot of startup costs. There's a lot of problems. You start to see dental cavities, caries, other types of things, workload stresses that really change when you start devoting it to corn. So I think they're transitioning to using corn is not for energy, for calories, or anything nutritional-wise. I think it's either a political or religious reason that they pick it up, but that's another talk. They have kinship and marriage alliances. 500 years before this, so this goes to 1000 AD. At 1000 AD, there's a short window in time where groups, particularly at the mouth of the St. Johns River, are interacting with other natives in Cahokia, in St. Louis, Missouri. We're getting copper, galena, all these things that are coming from the Ozark Mountains, the Appalachian Mountains are coming in and fish, and shellfish are going out of this area. That breaks up about 1250, 1300. So the groups we see here at Mocama contact don't have those far-flung interaction networks, but they still have great connections to groups that are further to the south along the St. Johns River into the Okefenokee swamp area. So they still have these kind of network connections. They're not just sitting here. I think sometimes people think that Timucua, they're sitting here fishing, doing things just by their little village. They have these interaction and communication networks that are really, really pervasive. And the Europeans try to basically tie into those to understand things better and faster. We do see rating. So what we're going to see with all those different Timucua speakers, right? Not all of them get along. There is going to be rating among them. Very volatile landscape that some Timucua are pitted against one another. And I think the frequency we see about it in the European accounts probably means it has a little bit of history here. So some of those speakers are allies. The Mocama speakers, they're allies with the Potano in Gainesville. But in between them are the Utina, who neither one of them seems to be getting along with, at least that European contact. All right? And the Spanish and French try to play off on that. They try to get on both sides, and they try to pit them against one another, so it gets kind of exaggerated during that point in time. But these rating that goes on, it's not really warfare, it's usually revenge ratings, that they will avenge something that another village did to them. But the way it works is, okay, you did something to us, we're doing something to you. Well, that's not, we're done, it's even Steven. Now that group says, oh, you did something to us. So it becomes these kind of vicious cycles that never really have any endings. Okay? So that's what we see going on. Usually when people start getting killed, or if someone gets killed, they run away. It's over. We made our point. And that frustrates the French and Spanish who think we want to go in and to annihilate, our enemy. All right? Religious practices. This is a hard one because there's not a lot written about it. What we do have sometimes with the priests writing about their superstitions or something like that, but we can glean a few things from it. One thing is probably the three world system, okay? The cosmology of Southeastern Indians, no matter who they are, all kind of share this version, okay? So we would think the Timucua will likely probably do, even though we don't have it written down. And the three worlds were that there is this world, there is the above world, and there is the below world. And don't confuse them, they're not like heaven and hell, okay? There used to just be two worlds. The above world, it is perfection, okay? It is order, it is predictability. There are spiritual forces and deities that are there, okay? It's pastime, it's where our ancestors are. Then there's the underworld, it's represented by fire. What's the opposite of fire? Water, the underworld. So springs and other things like that are the portals into the underworld. So the underworld is chaos, right? It has spiritual forces and deities as well, right? It's unpredictable, okay? It's future time, okay? Then there's a third world that floats on the ocean, a flat thing that floats on the ocean, right? And that third world is this world, present time. It mediates, it balances the chaos of the above world and the disorder of the underworld, right? But here, space and time can collapse, and the past can basically represent it here. So that's what we're talking about. Their sense of time and their ontologies are more circular than our linear one, because that can happen through certain bundlings, through certain conditions, through certain circumstances, in certain places. The past and the dead, the event, can be brought to the present. Okay, so that's different there. They have powerful forces. They have spiritual beings that are there. So we know about some of these, but not a lot of great detail, which is unfortunate. They had a lot of first fruits, first catches kind of ceremonies. So there would be rituals associated with the first kill of the year, the first catch of the year, in which they would sacrifice it. Typically, animals had to be placated in thanking that spirit for allowing them to kill them and consume their meat. Taboos, certain things you couldn't eat or do in certain situations. Okay? The rituals here were to create harmony and balance. One of the major themes in Indigenous religion is creating that harmony and that balance. Things have become out of whack, and we have to restore kind of that balance that is there. So to cure, to divine. For them, a lot of times, sickness isn't caused by viruses or anything like that. It's some sort of spiritual problem that needs to be kind of cured. Cleansing. So they basically do these rituals to kind of render the spirit world and the natural world kind of meaningful to them. Okay? And they had ritual specialists. Okay? They had herbalists. They had, there's that word shaman that some people can kind of use. Various kinds of kind of spirit seekers. So trying to kind of intervene and contact the spirit world. So we see there were males and females, so they had kind of different kinds of roles. And a lot of times herbalists were curers. Okay. All right. And then we see a strong sense of ancestor veneration. That leaders, basically the power of those Hulatas, their power really sprang from their ancestral ties, right? All right. So, they had control over esoteric and otherworldly knowledge, all that kind of knowledge that structures societies, that structures cosmology and religion, that structures their custom. They're kind of controlling that. So the leaders, and the elite families, they had access to the cosmic realm, to the spiritual realm. They're connected to them because of their ancestors. And this is all kind of codified in an ideology that these leaders perpetuate that basically kind of gives them kind of a elite status, special privileges, those types of things. There seems to be a strong association with the past, and we see in a lot of archaeological instances, they maintain things that are hundreds and thousands of years older than they are. We have this great site that we work on, Jacksonville area, and we're finding things that are 1,000 years older that they're using in ceremonies and rituals because it becomes a physical manifestation of the past and their ancestors. And probably under certain conditions, those things can be animated and those things can be brought to life. So we'd see that. All right. So who were the Yamasee, Guale, and what are they doing on Amelia Island? So their arrival here in the island is going to be in the late 17th century. So they're going to be like beginning in 1660s they get here. So this is kind of looking at our area. Here's our Mocama, Guale. So the Guale are immediately north of the Mocama. So they're going to be probably on from the Altamaha River northward. Okay, St. Catherine's Island, all those barrier islands that are from the north of the Altamaha River. Okay, they are Muskhogean speakers, so they speak a completely different language. They speak the same language that's going on in the interior. So their heritage is probably from the interior part of Georgia. All right, and then you have the Yamasee. The Yamasee are further up the Altamaha River where it splits into the Ocmulgee and the Oconee rivers. They're in this interior place. Okay, so that's where they all are probably in 1560s when the French and Spanish first arrived. All right, but what we'll see, that pressure that starts with the Carolina colony, first with the Virginia colony to the north, because they actually start raiding for the Virginia colony, then the Carolina colony comes and they start raiding more. So you see this kind of pressure pushing them down. They come in, and we'll see that what the Yamasee do. So we start to see the Guale move into this area in the 1680s. Okay, the Yamasee actually move in a little earlier. Now the Yamasee are a little complex. When they start moving away from their homeland, they go in many different directions. They have this kind of like diaspora. They go to the coast, and then from the coast they will go here. So some of them will go from kind of that Savannah River area to Amelia Island. We'll see 3 of them on Amelia Island, 3 settlements here on Amelia Island. And they're here from 1667 to 1683. Then they go back to the north area, to that North Savannah area, all right? And then after they go back there in 1687, they come back to St. Augustine in 1750. So it's interesting, they're here, and then they go back. And when they go back, they start helping out to raid the Timucua and other groups, and then they end up coming back and living out the rest of their lives kind of in St. Augustine, or at least some of them do, and then in other areas. So they move all around the board. Okay, so it becomes kind of confusing. But the Guale tend to stay here. Some of them will go back with the Yamasee. So it's really a complicated kind of lot of moving parts. All right, so what do we have here on the island? Okay, we mentioned before we have those two communities that are here. Okay, we have Santa Maria, and then we have Santo Domingo, which is Namuerca, and that's Old Town. So this is Old Town, that's Harrison Homestead. We know that Harrison Homestead, like I said, will get a priest in 1607. Okay, then we have Yamasee move in. The Yamasee move in, they are considered by the Spanish pagans because they're not accepting missionization. Okay, but because they need their support against the English, they allow them to come in without really becoming Catholic. All right, so we see that there are 4 of them on the island. So 4 Yamasee on the island in 16, I think this is 16, right around 1670. Those are the populations for them. So they're not huge, but they're here. So they start to the north in Old Town, and they're sprinkled down to Harrison Homestead. Then we have the Guale. So they leave in 1683. Okay, and as soon as they leave, the Guale move in, and the Guale do have missions. So they're moving their mission communities here. Okay, so we see Santa Clara Topeka, we see San Felipe, and we see Santa Catalina de Guale. The one we know the best about is Santa Catalina de Guale. They are going to move to Harrison Homestead. Okay, so in this map here, we are going to have them at these 4 locations. Okay, so Harrison Homestead, Forest Bluff, 8NA44, 37, and then Old Town. All right, and so again, here they are, just to give you an idea. So at Old Town, we definitely have all 3 of them living here in Old Town. For this one here, just the Yamasee here and there. For Forest Bluff, these 2, then Harrison Homestead is going to have 3 sequential occupations by Mocama, by Guale, and then by Yamasee. Okay, what makes this confusing as archaeologists? Early on, they are making 3 different types of pottery: the Yamasee, the Guale, and the Mocama. what happens after 1600? They all start making roughly the same thing. So after 1600, it's hard to differentiate which one is which. We're trying to tease out little subtle nuances that are there. Okay. In the last few minutes here, we have Santa Catalina. It is on St. Catherine's Island, Georgia. So this is a Guale. This is one of the early Guale missions. So while the missions are going on down here in northeast Florida, southeast Georgia, we see a couple of priests up in the Guale area. Okay? One I'm going to talk about is Santa Catalina de Guale. All right? It's there. In 1680, it moves down one island to Sapelo Island. So it's on Sapelo Island from 1680 to 1683. Eventually, it moves here to Amelia Island from 1683 to 1702. Okay? In 1702, all of these missions, so now is this time right here, 1680s, all of the mission people, Indians, Guale are here, and all the Mocama are here. So all those areas they once had are now really restricted to these two locations. All right? So Santa Catalina de Guale is at the site of Santa Maria. All right? So this is a map. Okay, you can see it here. This is where Santa Maria is. This is the archaeology that went on. This is Santa Catalina. All right? So at Santa Maria, right here, 1607 to 1665, this was University of Florida on the Dorian property back in the mid to late 1980s. They actually found the church. Underneath the floor of the church is where the cemetery was. Most of the church, or 40% of it, had already eroded, into the marsh. Now, when this was first found, they thought it was the Yamasee church, but the Yamasee didn't have a church. So now it's come to light that this first church they thought was the Yamasee church is actually the Mocama church. So this is it. Okay? Then you have the Yamasee move into this area. So we have the Yamasee kind of living in this area here. Okay? They may have utilized that standing church for something else, but that wasn't a functioning church at the time. Okay? Then the Yamasee leave in 1683, and the Guale come in. And when the Guale come in, they actually build the core area. So they have found the church and the cemetery, a separate one here. They have found the outline of the convento, which is the friary, where the friar would have lived. They found the kitchen area, another activity area. They seem to have found an indigenous structure here. Okay? So they have this part of it. So the main part of the Mocama community was right down here. The main part of the later Guale community was here. We're not sure. I mean, the Yamasee were somewhere in there. We just don't have any really definitive landmarks. So I think it's called Plantation Point. After this was excavated by the University of Florida, they were developing Plantation Point just to the north. And actually, Santa Catalina continues to the north. And what they have there, when archaeologists worked there before they developed the house and the retention pond, they found a huge well. Okay, and this was a wood planked well. Okay, and so the reason they know in the friary, they actually found the seal to Santa Catalina. So this would have been a seal that when they sealed documents, they used wax and then they would put the seal on it. So it says Santa Catalina. So it's really great evidence for that. Can't beat that. And then this is kind of the well here, had all this wood planking down in the wet part that preserved. And then the bottom of it, I think it's on display here, is the complete picture that was found. Okay, all these other kinds of, we call these colonial wares. Colonial wares are made by indigenous women, but they're in European forms. So this picture, it's Native American pottery style, but it's a form they never had. So we get plates, we get mugs, we get little foot rings, things you never ever saw prior to the Spanish. We start to see them making small amounts of it, mainly probably for the Spanish, but they're using it as well. And then we're getting pieces here of Spanish olive jaw. Some great stuff coming out of it. All right. Okay, so the last few minutes. Everyone okay? Can I go for 10 more minutes, or you want to stop here? Okay. So, how many people have heard of these DeBry engravings? Yes. So these are DeBry engravings. They're supposed to be based on Lemoyne. Jacques Lemoyne was at the La Caroline Colony. Okay, La Caroline Colony, 1564, 1565. Okay. Water real quick. Okay, so he's in Fort Caroline when it's attacked by the Spanish. I find it hard to believe at the middle of the night being attacked, he goes, oh, I need to get my portfolio. And he's going to take all the things that he's painted, right? So he's assigned to be a cartographer, okay, mapper, but he also is a painter, okay? So he supposedly then must have taken it, and then in a driving rainstorm, could be a tropical storm or a hurricane, whatever it was, he's carrying his portfolio. They talk about they have to go through waist deep water up to their chest as well, and he's carrying it with him. So it seems really doubtful that he carried his there. If he painted them just from memory when he got there. Okay? All right. Well, DeBry tries to buy them from Lemoyne, and Lemoyne refuses because he wants to publish his own book. Well, Lemoyne dies, and so the story goes, his widow sells it to DeBry, and the DeBry says, I faithfully reconstructed these from the Lemoyne drawings, okay? From the Lemoyne watercolor. We have no Lemoynes to compare them to, so we'd have to take his word for it, okay? We also have to remember here that there are no copyright laws, okay? He's basically trying to make money. The DeBrys have this cutting edge now, this copper etching, which is replacing the little kind of carved wood kind of stamps that is going on. So they end up making these like large coffee table books. And what it is, they try to find somebody who's been to the Americas, so they have a narrative that they'll do, and then they'll want sketches to add to that. And these become very, very popular. All right? But we have to remember here, when he is doing this, he and his family end up doing like 14 books, okay, from different groups, from South America, from the Caribbean, and from the Timucua that are here. Timucua is his second one. All right? But what he has at his disposal while he's doing this, he has the Jacques Lemoyne watercolors, supposedly. He has Jean Roubaud's account. He has Laudonniere's account. Okay, so he has all the writings that have kind of happened. All right, so that was in 1560. He's going to be starting these in 1590, so it's about 30 years later, 25 years later. All right, but he has all this other stuff from Brazil. Okay, because he's going to do these just afterwards, but he already has them. And these are all these things that are Portuguese and French things that are in Brazil. And I think that a lot of these things are going to form the basis of what we see. So I want to try to show you these real quick. All right? What Lemoynes that exist today are watercolors of fruits, vegetables, and insects. Not one of those are from the Americas. Okay? People are arguing now that these things that he is doing here, they're so intricate, they think these are templates for needlepoint. Okay? So this is what we have of Lemoyne. Okay? So, let's look at this. This is Hans Staden. Okay? Hans Staden basically does these sketches. He's in Brazil. This is in the 1550s. All right? So we see these things where there's a wall around it, right? There's a little entranceway. Keep an eye on this little boat here that's right here. Also, see these women that are there, they're wailing. It's a death. So they're doing kind of a wailing, crying, mourning. Okay? Remember them, those women, okay? Again, here it is drawn by Jean de Leary, who's also in that area, okay? All of them have these kind of wooden things around them, these elongated houses, all right? Then we have John White. John White is at the Roanoke colony, okay? He's commissioned by Sir Walter Raleigh to draw that. So this is in the 1580s, okay? So that Hans Staden sketches I talked about, DeBry is going to do those. These John Whites from the Roanoke, the Lost Virginia colony, he's going to do those as well. Okay? And so here's DeBry's. So he's got this nice little thing here. You can see the wall around it. Okay? You can see the little river that's right here. There's a little opening right here. And then here's going to be the one he does of the Timucua. It's the same thing. He just kind of flips it over. He changes a few things around. He forgets, I think, that this is one of the long ones that you see here because the council house is not like that. So they're growing all their corn inside the wall, okay? Everything about it just seems to be really familiar, okay? So this is not, I could go hours on this. We think this is more what it's like, based on all the archaeology we've done. Also, know that palisade, the wall around it? Okay, we had all Timucua speakers. So we're talking about Hernando de Soto, every Spanish and French. Not one person mentions a wall, a stockade, a palisade around the Timucua village. Not one. Okay? The only time we see it is the caption underneath the DeBry engraving. Okay? So we think it's more like this. From Sarah Bay on Big Talbot Island to Queens Harbor to the work we've done there, to Black Hammock Island. All right, here's our whaling women, right here by Jean de Leary. Here they are with the Timucua, and here they are here with the DeBrys here, okay? So we see them, they get a little different, but we see them. Every house you see from every Native American looks the same too, okay? I'm gonna argue this is just clip art. He's just taking boom, 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 just slapping a name on it. He's reading something, said, okay, I got something that can fit there, I take that there, and boom. Okay, here it is. So here he is, can you see this little grill here and human body parts? So he's claiming that the hand statement says that the group in Brazil, the Tupinambá, are cannibals. So they're cooking body parts there, okay? Then we see the same thing by Andre Thevet, who's really just copying this one. And then we see DeBry do it. Again, the same house. So this is DeBry doing it, okay? It's interesting. Look how the Timucua went. They're not cannibals, but they are going to have all these animals that are there. But it looks the same. He's fanning it. He's fanning it. They have different hairdos, but he's read their different hairdos. I don't read much. Well, I'm going to read a lot, but I'm going to read something here. So can you see this one up here? Yeah. Tell me how accurate this might be. Okay. Our Americans, they stick 4 wooden forks deep in the earth, each fork as big as an arm, to form a square about 3 feet on the side and about 2.5 feet high. Across these forks, they place sticks at intervals of about 1 inch, or 2 fingers width. In this manner, they make a big wooden grill. Those who have some meat put it on the grill, and with very dry wood, they make a slow little fire underneath, turning the meat over and over as they cook it. Okay? They have no other way of preserving the meat except to cook it. So in one day, they will take about 30 wild beasts or animals that are described in this chapter. So he ends up describing them. There are deer, opossum, crocodile, lizards, snakes, and especially fish. Would you say that's a pretty good description? Yeah? Okay, that's Jean de Leary describing the Brazil group in South America. Okay? And here we have it here. Maybe it's a coincidence. Okay, Jean de Leary. Okay, again, Brazil. We have the Tupinambá and the Tupi-Quinn, and they're fighting one another. So these are the battle situations. Notice the area. There are mountains in the background, very accurate. Okay. Hey, here are the Timucua with the look at that. We got our mountains here in Florida, right? And of course, this rank and file. This is European battle form. This is not how indigenous people would have fought. Also, what we like are these really distinctive Brazilian war clubs. They look like paddles. Okay. Hey, look at this gun. The Timucua are using them. Okay. So they never had anything, like this. All right. Here again, we see Jean de Leary. We see hand stains with a preparation of a feast. Okay. We see the women down here. We see them here. We see the feast going on here. So we see again just a lot of kind of similarities with these. So sometimes I think entire scenes are taken out. There they are. So in all of these, we see kind of the women down preparing them. So that's a kind of recurring theme. DeBry also, when we start looking at his, they're very Romanesque and Greek-like kind of figures here. It's mannerism. He's kind of rendering all in that mannerism style, or flaunting the human anatomy and so forth. Okay, I like these little kids. See these two little kids? They're down here wrestling or dancing. See them? Yeah. Did everyone see them? Down here in the blue, there's 2 little kids down there. Hey, here they are. But they have little cheers there, but there they are again. And the Timucuan one. So these little things are kind of recurring themes that he has all these things, and he's reading something and goes, okay, I can put that together, and pulls out all these different things. Here we go, the DeBry's right here, again going into battle formation. Again in the background, rank and file is not going to be it. But you can see this style here of the hand stain was they have the same general kind of pose, really distinctive headdresses that the Timucua did not have. Then we have those oars in all of them, those little war paddles. All right. And then here's their farming. Come on, this is bed and furrowing, which they did not do. Plus, I think they've denuded every tree in Northeast Florida. But they did not have fields like this. So some of the things here, that looks like a little dibble stick. That's probably how they would do things. But some of these other things are clearly not how indigenous people. These would have been heavily kind of wooded areas, which they would have done a small clearing and kind of farming gardens among them. But this bed and furrowing is not that. And then we get this one here. So the New York Museum years ago had found this one, and they thought, we finally have found an original was Lemoyne. And so it's like the greatest thing, it's putting a vault and everything. Now they've come to find out this is probably the first colored version of a DeBry. So this is actually after DeBry. So this is not a Lemoyne. Everyone agrees with that now. This has been used to perpetuate the myth that the Timucua were 7 foot tall. You hear about the 7 foot tall Timucua? Every burial that's done in Florida, we've never seen anything approaching that height. Satirigo was supposed to have been tall, and he may have been, into 6 foot, but it looks like women are in the 5'3" range, and men are in the 5'6", 5'10" range. Doesn't mean that there couldn't be an individual in this, in the low 6s, but it's not going to be 7 foot tall. So it's a lot of times done in comparison. So what I think this is, these are the Tupinamba. So I think the Timucua and these things is basically, this is the Tupamanization, the Timucua. So I think we need to be very, very careful to them. I think everyone wants to, say, oh man, we got these great little snapshots of the Timucua right there. He was here and this is it. It just doesn't appear to be that way. So what we are undertaking at the University of North Florida is we're undertaking this project to try to reframe them. We're using archaeology, more critical reading of the historic documents, and then we're hiring indigenous artists to kind of lend their kind of bent as well to try to kind of redo these in a way. Not the exact scenes, but general broader themes to them to try to be much more accurate so we can start replacing them. Because a lot of museums and other places, I think, use them just because there's nothing else. All right? So I think I'm going to end it there. All right? So if you have any questions or anything.
So the Indians from Florida migrated down to Brazil?
No, I just think that basically they're taking the sketches of the Indians here and they're doing there.
In Spanish?
Spanish, yes. Oh, basically DeBry. So he's Flemish. Okay.
He traveled between...
No, he never left his workshop. DeBry never left his workshop. So he tried to get someone who had written something here and did sketches, someone who had written something here, but he took the sketches from here and made it about those people.
So is that the only relationship between those 2 points?
Yes, yeah.
Why is it, I don't understand how it became, why was there a relationship at all? Nobody went from one to the other.
No, but he's basically, he's writing these books for people in Europe. So he's trying to tell them about this great new world that's been found. So, yeah, that he's never seen. So he wants to sell, he's making money. He wants to sell these things to make money. So basically he says, okay, I'm going to do this group. And he's trying to find all the information that he can on them. But if he doesn't have enough sketches, he'll just take it from another area. You know what I'm saying? To do it. So when he writes this one here, he doesn't have a lot of things or anything. So he just starts taking it from the other areas and just kind of an illegitimate transfer.
Paste it.
Yeah.
Paste it.
Yeah, clip art. Yeah. Cut and paste. Cut and paste. Yep. Now we're just going to slap a name on it. It's Timucua. Yeah.
You talked about 2,000 pages of written Timucuan and things are being translated into Timucuan words. You mean to say they had a written language?
No.
Or that they learned European and they were...
So what happens is they don't have a written language at all, no. So what happens, a lot of the elites, their children were kind of taught to read and write in Spanish. And so what it is, they learn that there, and then they start to kind of write it out in their own language.
I have a follow-up on that.
Yes.
When they did that writing, they wrote it in Spanish, but was it phonetically the other language? Is that how they did it?
Yes, so when we read it, we just assume that it's phonetically, we read it as, or I don't, they read it as
So they're trying to
Spanish.
phonetically in Spanish represent their language?
Yes, yep, yeah. And so, so we have, and when I say 2,000 pages, most of that we have both the Spanish version and a Timucuan version. And so he thinks that basically the Timucua write it, so a lot of these things that are being written in Timucuan, it's Timucuan ghostwriters who are doing it. It's getting no credit.
You stated that, was it 12, 14,000 years ago, the east coast of Florida was 70 miles
Yes.
to the east.
Yeah.
So basically, there's a lot of things that we'll never find.
Correct. And the same thing is on the west coast of the Gulf Coast of Florida. And there, the continental shelf's a little different, so they've been able to actually do underwater archaeology on the continental shelf there and finding all great things. Right now, the oldest date we have for humans in Florida is 14,000 years ago, and it comes from the bottom of the Asilla River. But 14,000 years ago, that it was about a sinkhole, okay? And what happened, like that time, 14,000 years ago, a lot of the ocean waters are still trapped in glaciers and larger pieces of ice. When those start to melt, it pushes the interior water table up, which means those things that were sinkholes, it breaches those and eventually forms rivers and creeks. And
Now,
most of what we have is spring
When
fed.
Christianity started, so that the first peoples, they buried their dead, correct?
Who's that?
Yeah. Now, I thought I read something, like, this is probably precedes this, but what is the thing about they found them preserved in peat bodies?
Okay, that's
That's going way back.
no, yeah, so that's going back probably 6,000 BC or more, so that's 8,000 years ago. That seems to be the mode of burial, the way they bury people, at least within the southern 2/3 of the state.
Okay.
And what it is, immediately upon death, they would take them into these shallow kind of swamp areas, and they would press them underwater, the dead body, and then they would cover it with textile, like plant-based textile, and then stakes. And so one of them was excavated in the 80s by Florida State, and it's called Windover. And the bodies are in complete, no tissue, but the bodies are, the bones are just like a comparative collection. The only thing, they're tannin stakes, so they're brown. The preservation is so good, one female, the fetal bones were preserved. Then they started realizing there was something in the skull. They thought it was just muck, and it's actually human brain. So they have human brain.
Where is the Harrison homestead? Where is that specifically located? I'm going up on.
So you know where Plantation Point is?
Pardon me?
Isn't there a community today called Plantation Point? That's immediately south of that.
Okay,
It's along Harrison Creek.
what is it?
Along Harrison Creek.
Okay.
So it's kind of like it's in the central west side of the island.
Did the Timucua make it all the way to the Gulf of Mexico
No.
for any particular reason?
Their distribution? No, we have other groups that were along there. So they were probably just inland from the St. Johns River, just west of the St. Johns. And then we have the Tocobaga and the Appalachian and other groups that are kind of along the coast. So they're just along the Atlantic coast. They don't stretch that far. And then a little bit of the panhandle. Yes, sir.
What was the indigenous population pre-European arrival?
Tough question to answer. It's just, it's wild things. Someone has said that there may have been as many as 200,000 Timucua speakers. That seems a little high, but we know from that 200,000 that it's down to just a few hundreds, by the late 1600s. A lot of it's going to be death due to disease, but I think some of it's going to be out-migration. I think a lot of people want to say that the Timucua are extinct, and these become these kind of terminal narratives. Timucua as a coherent group are, but I think a lot of the Timucua had moved to the interior, and they end up being absorbed by other indigenous groups. So one of these things you see in the Spanish records that a lot of times people don't know about is one thing about the Spanish are real worried that the Timucua keep going into the woods, and they don't know where they go. And they don't. Sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. So once it's beyond their sight, they don't know where they are. But I think a lot of those groups eventually become part of the Seminoles. We know that some Mocama moved to Appalachia, which is Tallahassee, and then they moved to the Lower Creeks, and then eventually the Lower Creeks moved to Oklahoma. So now we have groups that are in Oklahoma, the Muskogee, who have who claim Northeast Florida as part of their homeland, as do the Seminoles. And I think that's very legitimate. Yes.
Do you have any, did you do any genetic studies that link these folks to the Sinapa or the Athabascans out west? I mean, what's the genetic connection?
Well, so one thing about the genes is a lot of times you can't, well, we don't look, right now, it's a real sensitive time that indigenous people don't want us to do that kind of work on their bones. But a lot of times they can't distinguish between different types of indigenous people. You can be indigenous, but not necessarily, they can do it at the familial level, the family level, but you wouldn't be looking for that. You just want to say, can you tell the difference between Navajo bones as opposed to Timucua bones, as opposed to Athabascan bones and things like that. And I don't think that's there yet. Anything else? All right, then. Thank you very much.